Oh my God, look at all these people. Look at all these
Is it
people.
like a Zoom thing?
I guess.
Wow.
Lynn's iPad. She's not on yet. Carol Halverson and
Okay, just one more minute, I think, and just wanted to.
I just heard somebody's voice from somewhere.
Oh, I think Mike will turn off everybody's microphone.
Oh, perfect.
When we start, so that, yeah, we don't want to be distracted or hear dogs barking or the TV.
Yeah, I've got everyone else off already, so.
Okay, and I'll shut myself off too as soon as we get started, which I think we will get started right about now.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you everyone for joining us, because we are going to have a wonderful program tonight, and I'll get to that in just a minute. First of all, I want to let you know what we have coming up. Our August concert, our Arts Alive concert this month is on August 22nd, Sunday at 2 p.m. And it is the Shamrock Ragsters. They've often come and performed for us around St. Patrick's Day, but they don't just do Irish music. They have Irish music, Dixieland, bluegrass, and it's 4 musicians plus a vocalist. And I guarantee you'll be very entertained. Just have a great time. They're very talented and always give a great show. It's August 22nd. And then on August 24th, which is a Tuesday at 7 p.m., we are having a lady named Jennifer Barnes, and she has a program called Organizing 101. I need it. I need it badly. And she's going to help us do things like identify the hot spots in our homes, our offices, things that need cleaning up and how we can do it. She's going to tell us how to set up a control center. Not sure what that is exactly, but it's going to help us get organized, whatever it is. Anyway, sign up for the concert and the program online on our website, like you did for tonight's program. And I think you're going to enjoy both of them. And now I'm delighted to get to tonight's program. Lynn Reimars, who is a teacher, author, and storyteller, loves to share this kind of the background stories of history that we're not as familiar with. She brings her famous ladies and she tells the story through them, the stories that we might not have heard about or read about. When I introduce her in just 1 minute, you won't recognize her, even though she's been at the library many times before, but you've seen her as Eleanor Roosevelt, Eliza Hamilton, Lady Catherine from Downton Abbey, and I think my favorite, Julia Child. So when you see her, she will be the ghost of Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt, who was tried, convicted, and executed for her part in the conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. But after you hear Mary speak in her own words, you will decide for yourself whether you think she was guilty or not. So please welcome the ghost of Mary Surratt.
I, Mary Elizabeth Sarat, should not have died on July 7th, 1865. I should not have been hung for the conspiracy of killing President Abraham Lincoln. I was innocent. My life should not have ended this way. History has not been kind to me or to my family. I am known not only as the first woman to have been executed by the United States government. I am known as the only woman involved in the conspiracy to kill the 16th president of the United States of America on Good Friday, April 14th, 1865. How could fate have been so cruel to me? I was a good Christian woman, remembered by those who knew me to be kind, loving, and generous. I was well-educated, well-mannered, a hard worker. I helped raise money to build our Catholic Church. I attended Mass regularly and prayed for those who needed my prayers. I was a devoted wife to my husband, John, who did not make life easy for me. I prayed for him when he took to drinking and when he died at an early age, leaving me a widow with 3 children to support my children. My oldest son, Isaac, my beautiful daughter, Anna, and my youngest son, John Jr. They were my pride and my joy. And it's for them that I drew my inner strength to keep food on the table and to keep a roof over our heads, even during those most difficult times, those days during the Civil War, the war that divided our nation, North and South, free state and slave state, the war that divided our families, brothers against brothers, that bloody war of 4 years, which ended in surrender by General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox in Richmond, just 5 days before that fateful night of Good Friday. Good Friday. Ford's Theater. No one will ever forget that night that changed the destiny of our nation, the night that changed Mary Lincoln's life, her family's life, my family's life. An American tragedy because of one man only, John Wilkes Booth. How did our paths cross that brought me to this fateful end? I have come back to tell my side of the story, to clear my good name. I will not rest until I do. I would like to take you back in time to the year 1823 when I was born. I grew up in southern Maryland on a farm where my father grew tobacco. With thousands of acres of tobacco land, my father owned slaves, 11 of them. I had an older brother and a younger brother who helped around my farm. Sadly, my father died, leaving my mother a widow at the age of 42. I watched my mother take care of our farm, our land, our tobacco, and our slaves. She became such an astute businesswoman, earning money from the tobacco and buying more land. My mother, she wanted me to have a good education. She sent me to the all-girls academy in Alexandria, Virginia. I studied French, geography, history, writing, needlework, and I also took bookkeeping. And it was there that I knew how privileged I was to attend this school, for girls my age did not further their education. And there I decided to convert from my Episcopalian faith to Catholicism. This school became my home day in and day out. I attended the school for 4 years. When I was 16 years old, I met and married John Harrison Surratt. He was 10 years older than myself. And I can say that I look forward to a bright and promising future. The only drawback at this time of my life is that my future husband did not share my Catholic faith, so we could not get married in the Catholic Church. We got married at a friend's home instead. A year later, I gave birth to my firstborn son, named him Isaac. 2 years later, I gave birth to my daughter, named her Elizabeth Susanna. We called her Anna. Then I gave birth to my son, John Jr. Oh, with our growing family, we were so happy. My husband purchased 236 acres of land. It is on this land that he decided to build an inn and a tavern. It was 12 miles from our nation's capital. He called it the Sarat Inn and Tavern. It was 9 rooms, 5 rooms on the first floor, 4 rooms on the second floor. It had a curing house to cure our tobacco, which our slaves worked in our fields. And it was not only our home, it was our place of business. And we welcomed guests who came down the dusty road to go to our nation's capital. And I became the innkeeper, doing most of the cooking and the cleaning. It was at this inn that I must say that I would have to tell you that is there that would lead to my room. Who knew that this home that my husband built would lead me to the gallows? But in the year 1859, my life felt complete. I could tell you that my children were going to boarding school. They were doing very well. Our inn was doing so well. And my husband decided to purchase a townhouse on H Street in Washington, D.C. for $4,000. It is there that I met the infamous John Wilkes Booth. But that would be 6 years down the road. The only drawback I had at this time in my life was my husband's drinking. You can imagine with the tavern how well stocked it was. He had 78 gallons of whiskey, 10 gallons of brandy, 5 gallons of wine, and 550 cigars. My husband drank day in and day out. I turned to my Catholic faith, to a priest to help my husband change his evil ways. I prayed for him daily. I held Mass at my parlor, and I had a traveling priest that came to deliver the Mass on Sundays. My son John was going to study for the priesthood. He was going to school in Maryland. I was so proud of my son's choice for his life work. And I was so proud of my daughter, Anna. Oh, she was at the top of her class with her grades. She was an accomplished pianist. She entertained audiences at the recitals. And I loved when she played the piano in our parlor for our guests. My son, Isaac, he was going to school to become a civil engineer. But I did not know that my husband was racking up debt from all of the work that he was putting into our inn and our tavern. He decided that he needed to sell some of his farmland to pay off some of his debt. He sold 100 acres for $10 an acre. He sold 75 acres on time to a neighbor named John Noddy, whose name appears, you will see, in this conspiracy theory. And also he sold the others some land that he could also pay off some of his debt. Although my husband did drink constantly, he was a very good provider, took care of our inn, our tavern, and took care of our land, our tobacco, and our slaves. By the year 1860, the winds of change were blowing. I can tell you that across our land, we were seeing a division. In the South, there were unfair tariff taxes, and then there was the issue of slavery. In the November election of 1860, well, our little town, the Surrattsville, became a polling place. My husband was the polling master. My husband, of course, believed in slavery, and so did my son, since we owned slaves. I can tell you that my husband and my son supported the Democratic president candidate, which was Stephen A. Douglas, who supported slavery. I could not vote. I was a woman. It was a matter of time, I guess, when women unite and try to get women the right to vote. When all the votes were counted, it turned out that a Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer from Springfield, was elected. Why Maryland did not vote for him. I could tell you by December of 1860, there was talk of the southern states seceding from the Union because of the issue over slavery. By December, the first state to secede was South Carolina. By the time Lincoln was inaugurated in March of 1861, 6 other states had seceded from the Union. I supported us forming our own Confederate States of America. I believe that we should support our states' rights in the South, which supported the land that we loved and we lived, which included the institution of slavery. And I supported the president that we elected, President Jefferson Davis, who was a military man who had graduated from West Point. And I can tell you that Maryland did not go to succeed with the others. She stayed loyal to the Union. And since I was a Southern sympathizer, I could never show my true sympathies to the South, for you see, I could have been arrested and thrown in jail. Lincoln's idea was that he was going to preserve the Union at all costs, which did lead to our Civil War. My son Isaac dropped out of his school where he was going to be a civil engineer, and he enlisted in the Confederate Army going to Texas. My son John, he dropped out of his dream of becoming a priest, and that he would now be a spy for the Confederate Army, going to Canada and also going to the South. I so worried about his coming and his goings. I worried that he could be caught as a spy and be hung for treason. Can I tell you that a mother's heart is the same whether her son is a soldier or a spy, whether it's for the Union Army or the Confederate Army, whether her son puts on a uniform that is blue or gray. You kiss your son goodbye, you don't know when you would see him again. You hear of conditions in prisons that are so horrible. You hear of boys as young as 15 years old fighting for a cause which they believe in. They lay sick and dying. Oh, a mother's heart will never die for their children. Sadly, during the second year of the war, my husband died, leaving me a widow at the age of 39. I had those debts that needed to be paid. Over the next year, I worked hard as the innkeeper, earning money to help pay the debts that my husband had taken on. And I did whatever I could do for the Union soldiers that came and stopped as guests at our Inn and Tavern. My daughter, Anna, she helped with the cooking and the cleaning. My son, John, when he wasn't doing his spy work, he came and helped me also do work around the farm, help with my tobacco, and help with my slaves. John had paid someone $50 to keep him out of being drafted into the Union Army. My son took over the position as the postmaster in our town, which helped him, I can tell you, to secretly send messages back and forth from the north to the south. My son knew the backwoods of Maryland like the back of his hand. As time went on, I found it became much more difficult for me as the innkeeper to take care of all the work that had to be done with my slaves and the tobacco and the inn and the guests. And then President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that in January of 1863, all the slaves in the southern states would be free. Now my slaves left me. Now we could not manage the fields of tobacco. So I had no choice but to now lease my property, Sarattsville Inn and Tavern, to a former Washington, D.C. policeman named John Lloyd. I decided that I was going to go and stay at our boarding house on H Street that my husband had purchased. I brought my daughter and my son came with me whenever he was in town. I took in boarders to help pay the rent. One of the boarders I remember was Louis Whiteman. He was a friend of my son who was preparing to be a priest also. But then when the war came, he dropped out of being a priest. I did everything I could for my boarders. I helped with the meals, I cooked for them, I did some of the laundry, I even mended some of their clothes. I was a good landlady. And Louis Whiteman and I shared the same faith, and he and I would go to church sometimes together. But he also worked for the War Department in Washington, D.C. He worked under Secretary of War Stanton. In my boarding house, he saw all my comings and all of my goings. And I can also tell you that he was loyal to the Union, which I would have discovered later. Who would have known that it was Louis Whiteman and also John Lloyd that would turn on me, and it was their testimony that sent me to the gallows. I wonder if I had not gone to move to the boarding house in Washington, D.C., if my life would have been spared, that I never would have met the 26-year-old famous John Wilkes Booth, that I would have lived a long life, that I would have seen my children get married, that I would have been a grandmother one day. But I did meet John Wilkes Booth in February of 1865. He came to our boarding house to see my son, John. Oh, I can tell you that people thought he was so handsome. He was so well dressed. He was so successful. And he had a lot of money that he would lavish people with gifts and take them to expensive restaurants. And he acted at Ford's Theater, which was down the street from the White House. He actually gave my daughter and my son tickets to see him act. My daughter had this picture on her dresser. And then my son came and saw it one day and he said, "Hide that picture." He said, "Booth is a crazy man." Well, none of us thought that Booth was a crazy man. We all knew about him north and south, why he was so famous as an actor, again, so handsome and so successful. He came from a very successful acting family. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, was well known as one of the finest actors across the states. And his brother, Edwin, he also was a well-known actor, although Edwin did not share the same sentiments of the sympathies to the South. John Wilkes Booth would have become a soldier in the Confederate Army, but he promised his mother that he would not become a soldier. His mother lived in New York with his sister Rosalie, and I know for a fact that his mother did not support John's Southern sympathy. John was the black sheep of the family. It's interesting that President Lincoln and Mary Lincoln would have known John Wilkes Booth, for they saw him act in a play at Ford's Theater just months before the assassination. President Lincoln would have recognized his assassin, that man, that handsome man with his raven hair, his mustache, and his deep black eyes. Booth came to my house, as I said, often to see my son. Sometimes when my son was not there, he came and talked to me. He was so charming. Everyone liked John Wilkes Booth. And then he actually had some other people that he knew that came to my boarding house. Why, one of the men that came to my boarding house was Lewis Powell, or Payne as he was called. He was very tall, very strong, and very handsome. He had actually been a Confederate soldier, and he was wounded and found his place in a northern prison. And after he was released, he had to say that he would give his loyalty to the North, although he did keep his loyalties and sympathies to the South. And when he did meet John Wilkes Booth, he gave his loyalty to John Wilkes Booth in exchange for money. Lewis Powell was one of the men that stayed in my home during the months for 2 nights up in an attic bedroom. And another one of the conspirators that stayed in my home also as a boarder overnight was George Azarat. I can tell you that I did not feel comfortable with these strange men staying in my home. My daughter testified at the hearing that I did not feel comfortable. But I can tell you that God is my witness that I did not know that they were plotting to kidnap the president. And I did not know of the plot for them to murder the president, which my son John was definitely not involved with. I went to my grave knowing that my son was not involved in the plot to murder the president, although there were many things that were published in the newspaper that said that my son had actually attempted to kill Secretary of State Stewart, and that there was a reward for my son after this, $25,000. And I would hear that there was a reward for Davy Harold, that was another conspirator, and also for John Wilkes Booth. But that was before I knew of any of this. I was suspicious of what they were doing in my house. I would know that they would go behind closed doors, Lewis Powell and my son and John Wilkes Booth, and they would talk secretly. And I know that they also had knives and guns, and Louis Weichmann was worried about some of these and complained to me about them. But I knew because my son was a Confederate spy that he needed these. But that did not stop me from telling my son that I cannot allow this in my house. You must tell me what is going on. Although he never would tell me exactly what was going on. I became very suspicious in March 17th of 1865. That is the date that the conspirators, 6 of them, rode away from my house on horseback. I would learn later that this was the day that they were going to try to kidnap President Abraham Lincoln. Why Booth had masterminded the whole entire thing. Why he was the one that put it all together for months. And he recruited people to try to implement this. What his goal was is that he was going to kidnap the president in exchange for the Southern prisoners that were in the god-awful Northern prisons. And he actually recruited 2 of his boyhood friends. One was named Samuel Arnold. The other was Michael McLaughlin. Both had been Confederate soldiers in the war. And he also recruited Davy Harold, who would help him to know the backwoods of Maryland. And he would also recruit my son, who would also know the backwoods of Maryland. He recruited another man named George Azarat, who could be the ferryman to ferry the president across the Potomac River to Virginia. And you know, Dr. Samuel Mudd, my son actually met John Wilkes Booth through Dr. Mudd. Dr. Mudd was a Southern sympathizer also. My son actually met John Wilkes Booth at a hotel to discuss the kidnapping plans. At first, my son thought it was ridiculous. They couldn't get away with trying to kidnap the president in his own capital in Washington, D.C., with all those thousands of soldiers there. But my son was taken in by Booth's charm, as everybody else was. And I knew that, I heard later that John Wilkes Booth had purchased two rifles, several revolvers, 3 daggers, and a pair of handcuffs. These rifles, which were hidden in the joist of my inn at Surrattsville, these were the guns that I was told by John Wilkes Booth to have the shooting arms ready. But this was war, I tell you. And even though I did not know about the plot to kidnap the president, I would have supported it if I would have known that our soldiers who were in these northern prisons, which were filthy and God-forsaken places, if they could have been saved. And that was why John Wilkes Booth made it his goal and mission in life to try to kidnap the president in order to have ransom to free the Southern soldiers who were in these prisons. John Wilkes Booth actually wrote that my love is for the South. He believed that he was right. He was a Confederate doing his duty to do this. By the end of February 1865, they were getting rather worried about trying to implement their kidnapping plot. For you see, at that time, the Union soldiers were closing in on the Confederate strongholds. But it was still weeks before any idea to implement the kidnapping would occur. And then on March 4th, President Lincoln was reelected to a second term. He had his inauguration on the Capitol steps. In the audience was John Wilkes Booth with some of his conspirator friends. He heard the president say, "With malice towards none and charity toward all." It was on this day that I would later learn that Booth told someone what a chance he had to kill the president on that inauguration day. Why, the president had had many assassination attempts upon his life. Why, his habits were well known. One evening, he was riding his horse to the soldier's home that he went to frequently, and there was an armed marksman hiding in the bushes who fired a shot, but the bullet went straight through his tall stovepipe hat. Another assassination attempt was when castor oil was ordered from the pharmacy. When it was brought to the White House, it was laced with poison. When President Lincoln put it to his lips, he thought it tasted quite queer, so he didn't finish drinking it. I guess it was not his time to die. But the plot to kidnap the president became a little bit more evident as weeks went on. It was March 15th that Booth decided that there was going to be his last performance at Ford's Theater. He called together the conspirators who were going to kidnap the president. They were going to discuss what to do next. He offered for them to come and sit in the presidential box, which is usually reserved for the president. He took them out to an expensive dinner afterwards and talked about how they were going to kidnap the president. Well, the attempt came 2 days later, on March 17th. John Wilkes Booth had learned that the president was going to the soldiers' home again to see a performance. It is there that the conspirators left on horseback my boarding house to go to attempt to kidnap the president, to implement their plan to hold him for ransom, to bring back the Southern soldiers. But again, as fate would have it, President Lincoln was ill and he did not go to the soldiers' home that day. I would learn later at the trial that my son was very disappointed that this did not get implemented. And this was the last attempt that the conspirators had to try to kidnap the president. For you see now, they were getting where it could be well known of anybody who could possibly attempt to assassinate the president or to kidnap. So there were many, many more soldiers around Washington, D.C. My son went back to doing what he was doing to actually go and be part of the Confederacy. But on April 3rd, I remember, that is when Lee, General Robert E. Lee, had to evacuate our capital of Richmond. For you see, the war was nearly over when the Union soldiers won almost that battle. And now, my son, on April 3rd, sent me a letter that he was going away. He was going to Canada or elsewhere. And before that, that was the last time I would ever see my son again. And then on April 9th, that is when Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. And that was the day that not only changed the destiny of our nation, but that would begin to change my destiny as well. Well, there were celebrations all over Washington, D.C., all over the North of this war almost being over. Lincoln was at the White House and he gave a speech that night. And it was there that Booth stood with some other conspirators. He was so angry that the South had surrendered. And he told one of the conspirators that will be the last speech he ever gives. And John Wilkes Booth held to that plan. For on Good Friday, he had his opportunity. On Good Friday, being the devoted Catholic that I was, I went to church that morning with Louis Weichmann. And then I would learn later that at the White House, President Lincoln and Mary Lincoln had breakfast with their 22-year-old son, Robert, and their 12-year-old son, Tad. Turns out that Robert had been a captain with General Ulysses S. Grant, Union Army, and he had been at Appomattox Courthouse to see General Robert E. Lee surrender. Why, he was asked by President Lincoln to come be with him at Ford's Theater that night. And Robert had said that he hadn't slept in a bed for months, that he planned to go to bed early. Why, by all accounts, I learned that some 12 other people were invited to sit in the presidential's box at Ford's Theater. All of them refused, including General Grant and his wife. The only people that did accept the invitation was 28-year-old Major Henry Reed Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. I can tell you that this is what I know about Good Friday, April 14, 1865. I learned that John Wilkes Booth went to Ford's Theater to get his mail. That's where he acted, and that's where he knew many people, as you know, there. And it is then that he learned that President Lincoln and Mary were going to be attending the play American Cousins that evening. It is on this morning that John Wilkes Booth saw his opportunity to assassinate the president. Well, he came to my home, my boarding home, later that afternoon on Good Friday around 2 o'clock. On Good Friday, I was going back to Surrattsville, for I was needing to get money that I needed from John Noddy, who was the neighbor who had leased the land my husband had given him, and he owed me $479. Now, I had already been to my inn on Tuesday of that week, which was the 11th. You see, I had received a letter from George Calvert, who was the man that I owed the money to, the debt that I owed to him. So I even had the letter that I showed that I needed to go to my inn at Surrattsville on Tuesday the 11th and on Friday the 14th. We used this for evidence. When I got there, I can tell you that Louis Weichmann had actually provided the buggy for me to go. He had gone to the stables near Ford's Theater, where actually John Wilkes Booth had kept his horse and buggy, and he was kind enough to give Louis Weichmann $10 to get another buggy, since John Wilkes Booth had sold his buggy just the week before. So he was kind enough to loan us the money, and I was grateful that John Wilkes Booth had helped me to get to my Surrattsville. When I went there on the 11th, on the Tuesday before Good Friday, John Noddy did not have the $479 that I needed to pay the debt to George Calvert. I returned home with Louis Weichmann, very disappointed. And then I received a letter from George Calvert on Good Friday demanding that I give the money to him. I went back to Surrattsville to get the money on Good Friday. Louis Weichmann and I had gone to church in the morning. He was off in the afternoon from his position working in the War Department, and we got another buggy to go there. And that's where I was going on that Good Friday. Before I left, John Wilkes Booth came to my home, my boarding house. I don't know, he didn't say if he was looking for my son John, but he knew that I was going to my inn in Surrattsville to get this debt. And he gave me a brown package with paper around it. At that time, I had no idea what was wrapped in this package. I would learn later that was inside the package were binoculars that he would need for that night. He also told me to tell John Lloyd to have his shooting irons ready, which were his rifles, that my son had hid in the joist of my inn at Surrattsville. He also told me to have John Lloyd have 2 bottles of whiskey ready, that he would pay for them. I didn't ask any questions of John Wilkes Booth. He had been charming to me. He had been kind to loan me the money for the buggy to go. I didn't ask any questions. And do you not agree with me? Do you think that a man in his right mind would tell me that he was going to have the plans to assassinate the president later that day? Even a crazy man wouldn't have revealed that. All I knew from what I heard later is that John Wilkes Booth spent the rest of Good Friday getting everything ready that he needed to accomplish assassinating the president at Ford's Theater. Now, everyone liked John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. Even some of the people who worked there testified at the trial that he had a winning way, that everyone liked him. I liked him. I never thought that he would be a crazy man who had such hatred for the North. And I would learn that one of his friends named Ned Spangler, who was a stagehand that had offered when John Wilkes Booth asked him later that evening if he would hold his horse in the back of the alley. Ned Spangler agreed to do so. But in the meantime, Ned Spangler, the stagehand, had to get the box ready for the president and his guests. He helped move a walnut red upholstered rocking chair for the president to sit in. He brought in a small sofa and some chairs for the guests. He also draped American flags around the front of the stage, you can see here. And he also put in a picture of President George Washington. It was to have been such a special evening for Mary Lincoln and the president with the end of the war coming. But as I said, John Wilkes Booth had other plans, and I, along with the world, would find out what they were. At 10:30 that evening, John Wilkes Booth entered the presidential box while the bodyguard of President Lincoln had slipped out to join the audience to watch the play. Booth found the opportunity to take his small derringer and point it to the left skull of President Lincoln and fired the shot. Lincoln slumped in his chair as Mary Lincoln screamed, and John Wilkes Booth attempted to jump over the box. But before he did, Major Rathbone attempted to stop him, and John Wilkes Booth took his knife and slashed his arm. As he jumped over, Major Rathbone yelled out, "Stop that man!" as Booth's spur caught on the American flag, dragging it down to the stage. He landed badly, breaking his left leg. As he began to limp off the stage, he yelled in Latin, "Revenge to the South!" As people in the audience were stunned, he ran out the back door into the alley, into the rainy night, where not Ned Spangler, but now another stagehand named Peanuts was holding Booth's horse. In his haste to get on his horse, John Wilkes Booth took the back of his derringer and hit Peanuts, and then also kicked him before he got on his horse, rode off into the rainy night, and was joined by Davy Harold, who was going to help in his escape plan. You can imagine the chaos inside of Ford's Theater. There were people now scrambling to the stage, trying to run out the stage door, trying to find Booth as he had escaped. And then there were soldiers who had carried the bleeding president across the street to the Peterson house and took him to a back room where they laid him in his bed. There was too small diagonally. Booth had masterminded on that short day what he was going to do to dismantle the rest of the United States government after he had assassinated Lincoln. He had told George Azarat that he was to assassinate the Vice President Johnson at his hotel. But George Azarat chickened out, got cold feet, went to the saloon next door, began drinking. But Lewis Powell, who was very loyal to John Wilkes Booth, he carried out his plan. He wanted him to assassinate the Secretary of State, Seward. Now, Powell went to the Seward home. He made his way into the home pretending that he was bringing medicine for the ill Secretary of State who had been in a carriage accident. As he made his way into the home, some of the servants and family members tried to stop Lewis Powell, but Lewis Powell slashed 3 of them with his knife, injuring them. That he made his way into the bedroom where Secretary of State Seward was lying on his bed, and Powell began to stab him multiple times in his head as he now, after he finished doing what he was supposed to do, he ran out of the Seward home into the rainy night. By 12 o'clock that night, I would learn that Booth and Davy Harold had made their way the 12 miles to my inn at Surrattsville. And John Lloyd, the innkeeper now that I had leased the property to, was there with the rifles that Booth had requested, with the whiskey that Booth had requested, but his leg was broken, so he didn't take the extra rifle. They did drink some of the whiskey, and Booth paid him $1. And then before they left, Davy Harold actually said and admitted to the innkeeper that they had assassinated the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of Secretary of State. Then they proceeded to go and make their way away from my Surrattsville. I would learn by 3 o'clock that Booth and Davy Harold had made their way to Dr. Samuel Mudd's home. And Dr. Samuel Mudd had helped fix the broken bone in Booth's leg, and also gave him some crutches. They stayed there for several hours before they were on the run again. The manhunt for Booth was on. On that Good Friday evening, I had wanted to go back to church, but it was so cold and rainy that I stayed inside and went to bed early. It was at 3 o'clock in the morning that I was awakened by a knock on the door. There were police there, and they were looking for my son, John. They said that my son, John, had attempted to assassinate the Secretary of State, Stewart, and had stabbed 3 other people in the family. I knew that this could not be possible. I told them that my son was out of town, that my son wasn't even in Washington, D.C., and I had the letter to prove it. They did not believe me. Of course, they went in their own manhunt to find my son. And then I would learn that it would take 12 days for Booth to be found. In the meantime, plastered all over the newspaper was this reward, $100,000 for the capture of Booth, for Davy Harold and my son, $100,000. Of course, I just prayed and hoped that my son, wherever he was at, would somehow be safe. I did not know the fate of my son at all. I just knew that I went to my grave knowing that my son was not involved in any of this. But then I would learn that Booth was on the run. He and Davy Harold found their way to a place called Garrett's Farm in Virginia. Now the soldiers had followed their trail. And when they tried to set a fire to the farm, to the barn, to force Booth and Harold to surrender, Davy Harold surrendered. Booth would not surrender. Now he was in the burning barn, and the soldiers shot and killed him. The manhunt for Booth was over. 3 days after John Wilkes Booth had assassinated the president, this was on Monday, I had received detectives that came to my home. They were there to arrest me, my daughter, and another woman boarder. I was shocked. What possibly would we have done wrong in connection with any of this? I would have learned that President Lincoln had died at 7:22 that morning after he was shot. I would learn of what was going on with the funeral, but never in my wildest dreams did I think that detectives would come to my boarding house and arrest me, my daughter, and the other woman boarder. Now, before we were getting ready to leave, there was a knock on the door. And it turns out that when the detectives opened the door, it was a tall man that had a skull cap on, covering almost most of his head and some of his face. He was very smelly, I remember, very dirty, I remember. He had a pickaxe in his hand. And I did not know who this was when the detectives asked me. People testified at my trial that my eyesight was not good. I did have cataracts, and the gas lights were very dim. So, and as God is my witness, I did not know who this man was that came to my home at that hour of the evening. When detectives had asked him why he was there, he actually said that I had hired him to dig a ditch the next day. Can you believe it? Well, the detectives didn't believe it, and I couldn't even believe that this would even happen. It turns out that this was Lewis Powell, that he was the one that had attempted to assassinate Secretary of State Seward and the 3 others. It was not my son. This was proof that somebody else had attempted to do this. And I would learn that this Lewis Powell had actually been hiding after the assassination attempt on Friday. He was hungry and cold, and he only knew of one place that he would find safety. Of course, because of my generosity, he came to my boarding house. Now, I had learned that Secretary of War Stanton was on for revenge. He was looking for anyone connected with the assassination attempt of their beloved president. Now, my daughter, myself, and the other woman, we were taken to the old prison yard, the Capitol Prison, and we were thrown into a cell that, can I tell you how horrible that was? It was rat infested, bug infested, filthy, smelling of urine. And I was in a separate cell from my daughter and the other girl. And I felt horrible that My daughter and the other girl were there. Thankfully, after they were questioned, they were released, but I was not released. For you see, it turns out that I was now charged with aiding and abetting John Wilkes Booth. Yes, ghosts can drink water. It turns out that anyone connected with the assassination attempt were taken in for questioning, and many people were brought into the prison, and many people began to talk, and many people began to lie, especially since they wanted that $100,000 reward. As it was turning out, I was now going to be charged with aiding and abetting Booth, and I was going to stand trial with the other conspirators. And we were going to be in a military trial, not a civil trial, which is what my lawyer thought would have been a fair way for me to have been tried. We'd be tried in front of 9 commissioners, all men who were loyal Union officers. All of us conspirators charged were all loyal Southern sympathizers. May 12th was when our trial began. Every day I was escorted from my cell to the place of the trial. I sat behind the rail with my veil over my head. I had chains now around my ankles. And I listened as witnesses testified, not only about the assassination of President Lincoln, but also about the kidnapping attempt. And I heard so many times my son John's name mentioned in there. Someone even said that they saw my son John over by Ford's Theater the night that John Wilkes Booth shot the president. Lies, so many lies. And I would know that my son was out on the run. People called him a coward for not coming forward, for helping me, for having my good name released, that people thought that I was the scapegoat for my son, John. I could only say that I believe that John had his reasons for not coming forward. And I could only pray that he would not be suffering the fate that I was going to be confronting. There were people who came to my defense. There was George Calvert, who was the man who I owed the money to, that sent the letter to me, and we presented the letter as evidence. And then John Noddy, who actually was the man who owed me the money, why I was going to Surrattsville that day on Good Friday and also earlier in that week. My daughter Anna also testified that she did not know what was going on, that I did not know of the plot to kidnap the president, and I did not know of the plot to murder the president. If she had known, I would have known. But the testimony that sent me to the gallows were the 2 men that I had befriended. Louis Weichman, the man who was the friend to my son, who I treated like a son, that I cooked for, and we went to church together. He testified how he had taken me to Surrattsville on that Good Friday, that I had seen John Wilkes Booth on Good Friday, that I had told John Lloyd to have the rifles ready, that I had told John Lloyd to also have the binoculars ready. And then John Lloyd also testified all that Louis Weichman had said. So it was the 2 of them that sent me to the gallows. And this is an interesting fact, that both of them were loyal to the Union, and they had turned state's evidence to save their own hide. I was now convicted, and I was to be hung along with Lewis Powell, who had attempted to kill Secretary of State Seward, Davy Harrell, and also George Azarat. As for the other men, there was the boyhood friends of John Wilkes Booth. There was Samuel Arnold and Michael McLaughlin, who had been the plot to kidnap the president. They were given life in prison. And then there was Dr. Mudd. Dr. Mudd had actually helped set John Wilkes Booth's broken leg. So he actually aided and abetted in his escape. Don't you think, giving him crutches to go on? Dr. Mudd also knew of the plot to kidnap the president. So I ask you, why was he given life in prison when I was given the death sentence? And then poor Ned Spangler. Oh, I can tell you that the only fault that he did during this conspiracy trial was that he was a friend with John Wilkes Booth. And he had agreed to hold the horse when Booth escaped, although he never did. It was Peanuts, another boy that did. and he got 6 months in prison. Secretary Boris Stanton had said that the date that we were to be hung was July 7th, the date after our conviction. He did not want any time for appeal. But I can tell you that people tried to rise up to my defense to try to change the mind of our new President Johnson. My daughter, my beautiful daughter, Anna, went to the White House sobbing, tried to get the doorman to let her go and talk with President Johnson. But the doorman said that the president was ill. Oh, what a coward he was. He knew how the 9 men commissioners had voted. They voted 5-4 in my favor that I would find life in prison and not the gallows. They had signed a clemency plea stating that they believed that President Johnson was going to commute my sentence, that he was going to change it from hanging to life in prison. They were deceived. I did not receive a fair trial. I was not able to testify at all. Instead, it was there that I would be told that I was now going to be hung for the conspiracy of killing the president. At night, I can tell you the night before I was to be hung, it was a terrible night, as you can imagine. My daughter came to my aid, came to my side until she had to leave. And then another man, a neighbor, a man who I truly admired, John Brophy, he came and he believed my innocence. He also said that he would take care of my Annie, and that when all of the passions of the war had cooled, that he would try to clear my good name. Another, I had my last confession with Father Walter. Father Walter believed that I was innocent, that they were sending an innocent woman to the gallows. A couple other people also came to my defense. Lewis Powell actually pleaded with the superintendent and the prison guards, saying that I did not deserve to die with the rest of them. And William Woods, who was a superintendent of the old Capitol Prison, he went to President Johnson and he told him also that I did not deserve to die. And the widow of Stephen A. Douglas actually went to the president also. And then John Ford, the owner of Ford's Theater, he had been in prison. He had heard many things, and he believed that I also was innocent. And they all tried to talk the president into commuting my sentence from death to life in prison. But the president would hear none of it. The president instead said that I was the nest that hatched the egg. The night before I was to go to the gallows, I felt like Jesus, who was in the Garden of Gethsemane at his last night, as he prayed and he prayed, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound to save a wretch like me. Dear God, I pray, please save me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Dear God, please give me the strength to face what comes before me," I prayed. The next day, I was taken from my cell and taken outside to the gallows. I had to walk up the 15 stairs that took me to the gallows. There I had my bonnet over my head and the veil, and I stood with the other 3 conspirators as we stood there. And I can say that it was a terrible time because I couldn't even walk up the stairs. My legs felt so woozy. I felt like I was going to faint. And then I looked out into the yard. I saw all these people here for this historical event. Oh, my heavens. They was going to be going down in history for something I never did. And then I saw the 4 coffins, wooden coffins, and I saw the 4 newly dug graves. And again, my legs became so wheezy. I thought that I was going to faint. And then someone held an umbrella over my head because they did not want me to faint before I was hung. And I still had my bonnet with my veil over my face. And the guardsman took off my bonnet. and he tied a rope around my neck with 5 knots instead of 7. For he believed, this guardsman believed, that still my sentence would be commuted, that I would get life in prison, that I would not hang like the others. 5 knots instead of 7. But when my hour was up and nobody came to rescue me, he tied my hands so tightly behind my back. And then he put on a cloth bag over my face so I could not see. And he tied my dress with rope and tied my ankles with rope. And there I was in that blistering heat. And the only thing I could think of is this hour was my children, my son Isaac, fighting for a cause that he believed in. Oh, I loved him so much. And my daughter Anna, so brilliant, who had a bright future ahead of me, of her. And my son John, out somewhere, hiding. Oh, I could only think of them. God watch over them. God keep them safe. I prayed silently. I lifted my soul up to God as the trapdoor opened. Sweet low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. I should not have died on July 7th, 1865. I should not have been hung for the conspiracy of killing President Abraham Lincoln. I am innocent.
Well, thank you, Mary Surratt, and thank you, Lynn Reimars. That was very intense. I mean that in a good way. It was like, very moving. We don't have any questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions now, you can turn on your microphone and ask Lynn or ask Mary. So her son John, did they find him ever, or?
After 2 years, they found her son John. 2 years he was in hiding. He went to Canada, he went to Europe, until finally the detectives found him, brought him back to America to be tried for the conviction of being involved in the assassination of President Lincoln. It turned out that he had a civil jury instead of a military jury, which was it was actually a good thing for him. It was a hung jury. They could not find him guilty, so he was released. He was a free man. He went into his life. He married. He had 7 children. He was a farmer and a teacher. Mary would have been proud of her son. I think she was actually probably the scapegoat. And I think what is another interesting part of this story is that her daughter sold the home, the boarding house. People who bought it actually said that it was haunted. Can I tell you right now that Mary would haunt the old prison gown yard, and she would haunt Surrattsville, and she was known to haunt the White House on July 7th, the day that she was hung. So her ghost apparently is still restless. I believe that she wants her story to be told. An interesting turn of events is at the trial of John. It turns out that there was a diary from John Wilkes Booth that Stanton had hid, that Stanton had torn out 18 pages. This would prove that John Wilkes Booth had planned to murder the president on Good Friday and not before, because the kidnapping plot was what was in place. The president would have an impeachment trial. Secretary of War Stanton and others tried to get him impeached. He did not get impeached by 1 vote. But one of the interesting things, when his term was over and General Grant became the next president, guess who Johnson pardoned? He pardoned the conspirators who had been in prison. They were supposed to be in prison for life. were in
Oh,
prison for
wow.
only 4 years. So Samuel Mudd walked, the other men all walked, and if Mary Surratt would have gone to prison for life, she could have gone out just like the others. But instead, she was hung for the conspiracy of killing President Lincoln.
Well, I know it was different times, but everything just happened so quickly. The trial itself, and then of course the execution, the hanging. It just happened within a few months. I mean, nowadays this would go on for years, and maybe she would have been at some point. There was no chance for her to have an appeal or a pardon or anything.
Right, exactly. And he wasn't going to give any time for appeal. So that's why he did it so quickly. But what I also found out is that Secretary of War Stanton had a bias against Southern women and Catholic women. And the Judge Holt that presided over the trial, he said enough Southern women have not been hung. So they were trying to use her, I feel. I think, as I talked to you, Janet, that I think she was guilty by association. So there's 2 verdicts out. I hope that I presented all the facts to you viewers that you could interpret if you thought Mary was guilty or not guilty. I'm in the middle. I think she had some involvement. How much with going to the Surrattsville to with the binoculars? I don't know how much they even really mattered, that she would be hung for that. But if she would have had life in prison, life would have been different for her. So.
Okay, well, we do have a few questions in the chat. I can read them to you. Well, first there's a comment that says, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you, and that we should invite you back again, which of course
Thank you.
We always do, and we will.
Thank you.
Then we have 2 questions. One is, what about her other children?
Oh, her daughter, Anna, would go and marry, and she would have 4 children, and she would live a good life. Her son, Isaac, I don't know a lot about. I only know that he would not learn of his mother's killing until October. So because there was still some of the war going on, it wasn't finished in Texas, and that he wouldn't even learn about it till much later. I really don't know what happened to Isaac. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to him.
That question was from Anne, and then we have from Richard. Could you please remark again on the 5-4 decision, which way, and the understanding that Johnson would commute?
Right. So they were kind of the 9 commissioners. Secretary of War Stanton wanted a conviction, and the jury was torn. 5 wanted her to go to life. 4 wanted her to go to the gallows, and they made a plea that said that they were going to vote this way, but they also believed that it was 5-4 against, with the idea that Johnson was going to give her clemency, but he never, apparently when things came out during John's trial, he had never even known about the clemency plea. He had said that was held away from him. So he kind of exonerated himself that he never had a chance to give clemency to Mary Surratt. So that's kind of how that all worked. I think it was like almost a plea bargain with the jury, kind of saying, you go this way and we'll make it work the way you really want it to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. They thought they were going one way, and they were connived and coerced to go the other way to show that, and they were told that Johnson was going to commute her sentence, and he didn't. So there was a lot more involved.
So I was just going to say, so there, obviously, as you pointed out, many people wanted her convicted. And so they were willing to say and do things that would change the outcome.
Oh, exactly. That's exactly it. Right. That's exactly it. And I think the interesting part of this is that I think that Secretary of War Stanton had a bigger hand in all of this than I had realized. So, I don't think he might have had some other things, especially him wanting to have Johnson impeached,
Oh gosh. Well, again, you gave just a mesmerizing performance, and I learned so much. I didn't know very much about Mary Surratt at all. Just
Thank you for choosing this one. I have to show you this haunting picture. This is actually, they took pictures of the hanging. This is an actual picture of Mary Surratt after she passed. Isn't that haunting?
yes.
And then she was buried in the old Capitol prison, that ground where she had been hung. And then after Johnson had left office, he allowed the daughter to come and take her body and have a proper burial. So that was good. And then I have to just recommend this book, The Assassin's Accomplice, Mary Surratt and a Plot to Kill Abraham Lincoln by Kim Clifford Larson. This her slant in here is that Mary Surratt was guilty by association of that. So it's a very interesting read if you're looking for anything to
Okay,
talk
well,
about.
thank you.
And then there's also the movie with Robert Redford directed about Mary Surratt. I forgot I forgot the name.
Is it the same title as that book, or is it
I
something?
think so.